is Angie Viscianen. I am the founder of Leg Up Legal. We provide a mentoring program that connects prospective law students to lawyers so that they can learn more about the legal profession before they decide whether or not it's right for them. And we started hosting these Zoom meetups at the beginning of COVID-19 to allow pre-law students, current law students, and young lawyers to all join these meetings and get some information that might help them in their legal careers. So I'm excited to introduce you today to Jamie Sal, and she is going to talk to you about her journey into practicing tax law and why she loves tax law. So Jamie, I will let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Angie. Yes, I love tax. I love tax law. I love being a tax lawyer. I specifically practice state and local. So I'm talking about like Maine and Texas, not estate as in your trusts and estates. But I find it so exciting. I really do. You think tax, oh man, tax is like to put me to sleep in class in law school. But it's here's my dirty little secret. I shouldn't joke about classes at law school because I didn't take tax law in law school. And I lucked into my job. So when people talk to me about, oh, well, is an internship worth it? I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I am living proof of the power of an internship and how that can make a huge difference in your career trajectory, in what you want to do. I went to Northeastern Law School. If you're not familiar with it, the program at Northeastern is a co-op model. Law students are required to complete 4 full-time 12-week internships over the course of their 3 years of law school. And so I started in a business think tank for one, and I went from there into the SEC and worked at the SEC while they were undergoing some of the Bernie Madoff investigations. And I said, ooh, this is really exciting, this idea of financial investigation and financial controversy. Controversy in the kind of financial and tax world means the investigation and audit side. So we're not doing planning, we're doing the litigation, we're doing the auditing. So when you hear the word controversy, that's what that means. From the SEC, I went to NASDAQ, and I was at NASDAQ during the fall of 2008 when the market crashed. And I vividly remember sitting by the trading floor one Friday morning. I don't know why it's always a Friday, and it was in October. I don't really know why it's what it is with Fridays in October and the financial markets crashing, but it was. And we were just sitting there waiting for the New York Stock Exchange to call and say, cancel trading, the desk is closed because the market has tanked so much. It came very close. There's a special red phone, it's like the red of my walls behind me. But they didn't close trading, but it was fascinating to me to watch the dynamic shift and how the policy changes started to come into play and how that impacted very quickly the controversy world and how you were looking at financial transactions in a context of rapidly changing world and global scenarios. But it also occurred to me that the recession was here. For those of you who are going to law school now, or you've seen over the last 2 years, when I graduated law school in 2009, it was a really bad year to graduate law school. And we all saw it coming. About the time that the markets crashed, the law firms were closing. My colleagues and friends in law school started to get their offers rescinded. And so I thought to myself, I really love financial controversy, but I want to expand that a little bit and see if I could be a more marketable person by trying a different aspect of financial services and financial controversy. And I ended up with an internship at the Massachusetts Department of Revenue in their litigation bureau. And I got there and it was like this aha moment just off for me. It combined so many different things that I really, really loved into one practice. Yes, it was financial controversy. So there was that aspect of litigation, that aspect of investigation and being a little bit of a sleuth to hunt down details. It was puzzle solving. It was very context driven and circumstance specific and industry specific. But constitutional law is the entire foundation of state and local tax. And I was a common law geek in law school. I was even a common law geek in undergrad. I love common law. And I saw in tax this opportunity to pursue a career arguing about the Constitution all the time. And I loved that. And the final part of it for me that I really loved was the combination of a code-based system where the definitions matter, the commas matter, the punctuation matters, how you look and piece together different statutes matter, with the creativity that is required to apply that code to businesses and individuals and context. And it was, to me, this marriage of left brain and right brain analysis that I just loved. And so I interned there, and I went back after graduation. I worked for the Department of Revenue for 8 years in both their appeals division, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of what the structure of tax controversy looks like in a moment. I worked in their litigation division. And after about 7 or 8 years, I was at the point for me that I was participating till then in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is a really phenomenal program for students who are financing law school with federal student loan debt, because let's be honest, I have a lot of it, and I'm sure other people do too. But I was at the point in that program that it was either I have to commit to state government for the rest of the public service program in order to get that loan forgiveness, or I needed to leave then. It was the make or break moment. My husband was from Maine. We loved going back to Maine whenever we could. So I was in the back of my mind looking for an opportunity to practice state and local tax in Maine. And I don't know, Elizabeth, if this is your experience so far, but what you'll find is there are exactly 3 firms in Maine that practice state and local tax. Mine, a firm that is mostly accounting services, but does a little bit of law, and Pierce Atwood is the name of the other law firm. And each of those firms has a slightly different take on how they do it. The thing that really drew my eye about Brann Isaacson and why I jumped at the opportunity to come here when one opened up was for the small law firm that we are. You know, we're 18 lawyers total, and there's 5 of us that practice in the tax group. We practice tax on a national scale. Let's see, one of my clients here with us today, which I'm really excited. Hi, Sherry. We do work for companies across the United States. We represent them in Washington and Arizona and Texas and Pennsylvania and Maine and every state in between. And I really, really love that we get to be here in a beautiful state, in a state that I love to live in, with the type of lifestyle that I love to have. I have a daughter who's 3.5, so I like that she has the opportunity to go out on my back deck and look up at the stars at night and see the sky and see the stars. But yet I can work on cases that are important to my clients who are running national multi-state businesses or international businesses. I'm working on cases that are of national importance. And I'm working on cases that allow me to be a perpetual student learning all the time without having to be in school. Because I love school, but I am done with degrees. So that's a little bit about what I love and kind of where I'm at right now. I practice almost exclusively state and local tax. And I guess the last thing that I should say, part of what drew me to Brann Isaacson, in addition to that national scale practice, was the opportunity, the real chance to work on a US Supreme Court case. If you are a law student, if you're thinking about going to law school, you want to be a litigator, it's like, you know, the be all end all, right? You work on a Supreme Court case and it's everybody's dream. And I saw a real chance in going to Brann Isaacson to work on one. And I did, played a little part, but it was a pretty important case. If you have followed tax law at all over the last couple of years, you may have heard of the Wayfair decision, as we call it now. You might have heard it in the news referred to as the Amazon tax case, but it was a Supreme Court decision from 2.5 years ago that completely upended the state and local tax world, and it eviscerated 50 years of precedent. So when else are you going to be, we call it the Wild West of tax right now, because it really has been like the rules went out the window, everything changed. And especially up until the pandemic, it was changing at such a rapid scale that keeping up with the changes was itself a full-time job. It was really exciting. For me, it's like every day you'd open the newspaper or your listserv or your daily list and say, oh, there's a new law in Oregon that we need to follow, and there's a new law in Missouri we need to follow, and there's a new law in Florida we need to follow, because it's making a real difference and a real impact in businesses in just trying to grapple with how their compliance and operations are going to change. So that's me and what I love about what I do and why I love it. But I'm sure you also want to hear a little bit more about what state and local tax is, and what it means to practice in state and local tax. So I'm sorry if I'm bobbling around. I'm standing and I keep falling over. It's really what it comes down to. So when we look at state and local tax, there's a couple different key areas that I practice in. The state and local tax world really divides into three. You have personal income taxes, which you and I all know it's tax day today. In normal years, the return's not due until next month, but happy April 15th tax day. So personal income taxes, there's corporate income taxes or business activity taxes, I call it. And then there's sales and use taxes. And by and large, I'm working with businesses on the corporate income and business activity taxes and on sales and use taxes. The part of state and local tax that makes it, I'm sure, frustrating for businesses and interesting for me, let me say two things. The rules are completely different in every state. So there is relatively little uniformity in how Maine treats one thing from Texas, from Wisconsin, and figuring out all of those variances, those changes, those impacts, it is a lot. And that goes across all three of those different really tax areas. The other thing about state and local tax that I really enjoy seeing and learning about is the heavy policy influence that you see coming through tax and tax systems. So, this is especially true in the sales and use tax world, where the differences state to state really highlight what a state thinks is important from a policy aspect. Is there an exemption for food and groceries, for instance? Recognizing that that's such a fundamental, critical need for people that they don't want taxes to stand in the way of someone being able to have access to food. There's so many other issues with food insecurity that, tampons. Emily, don't get me started about the pink taxes, because it is a real thing. There was a Michigan decision 2 years ago that said that there is no bias in the tax code when it comes to pink taxes. Pink taxes, feminine hygiene products, and diapers and things like that. And slowly that is changing. On the other end of the spectrum, you see things, or we call them the vices. Marijuana is a big hit item right now, where the state has decided, okay, maybe we will allow this thing to be sold, but we're going to subject it to such a high level of taxes that it becomes onerous and a burden, disincentivize, at least from a tax perspective. And seeing how those tax policies play out in the tax code is interesting, or at least it makes for compelling reading on my end. So when it comes to actually practicing as a controversy lawyer in the world of tax, there's a couple of different stages that you're looking at. I always love it when we get involved, as a lawyer, I get involved in what's called the audit stage. So this is that very first stage in the tax controversy world. You have, hopefully, if you're required to, filed a tax return. We'll get to in a minute the very legitimate reasons why a business or a person may not have filed one in the first place. But the audit is taking a look at, did what you put on your tax return make sense? Was it accurate? Did you have documentation you need to support your calculations or your deductions or your exemptions or whatever the case may be. It's verifying what you reported on your tax return. From the audit stage, we move into what is often an administrative appeal. So this is kind of an appeal process that is internal to the state or local government. You're maybe still working with an auditor, but you've moved on to a higher level of review. The part that I think is frustrating to deal with is once you get past the audit stage, often that's noted or demarcated by something called an assessment. This is an official notice from a state or local government that you owe more tax. The frustrating part is once that notice has been issued, most states have this law that says it's presumed correct, meaning that you, the taxpayer, have to prove the government got the assessment wrong if you're going to continue up the appeal process. After the internal appeal, then you move on into what is tax litigation. This could be in a tax-specific court, like we had in Massachusetts or in New York, and some other states have a specific tax court. Other states don't have as robust a tax enforcement system, so you're going to go into Superior Court and try the case, and then move your way up the appeal chain through the state court system, on the very rare occasion ending up with the U.S. Supreme Court. I was just about to say something about state court. Oh, tax cases. These are all bench trials by and large. We're not dealing with jury trials. I find learning about jury trials fascinating because I just don't deal with it on a day-to-day basis. When you get to litigation in the tax world, hopefully you have cleared out all of the low-hanging fruit. This goes back to why I think it is important, or why I like to get involved at the audit stage with a company if it's possible, because we can start setting up from the audit what are the things we can clear out with the auditor. Is it really just paperwork? We need to get you copies of an exemption certificate, for instance, or prove that there was an amendment in another state that is going to impact, you know, Wisconsin or whatever the case may be. And so that way you can clear away the things that everybody can agree on. And by the time you get to litigation, you're really only focusing on that legal question that an auditor can't answer. Maybe it's a gray area or an issue of first impression or a constitutional argument that an auditor is not allowed to consider. And so you want to get to the court stage where the only thing a judge or fact finder is looking at is that legal question. So that's a little bit about the tax process. I know I started off by saying I didn't take tax law in law school, but what I did do is go back and get an LLM in tax after law school. And LLM is, well, you know, it's an advanced degree, an advanced legal degree. It's kind of the, you know, the legal industry is a little oddball. You get your doctorate first and then you go back and get your master's. But an LLM, a general LLM, either preps you to be in academia as a law professor. It can be used by a lot of international students who receive their law degrees in another country, but in order to get a bar license here in the United States, need to sit for a degree at an accredited law school. Or in the case of tax and a couple of niche practice areas, it really is a program that gives you the substantive underlying knowledge in order to practice as a tax lawyer in my instance. You know, I think that I certainly knew I was going to be a tax lawyer once I had that internship at the Department of Revenue, and I really loved it. I didn't have, though, the vocabulary that is in the tax world. I don't have an accounting degree. I don't have a finance degree. So I didn't have that, just the word knowledge that people who have an accounting or finance background or had taken tax law in law school would have had. And so I found going on to an LLM in tax extremely valuable, extremely helpful for me.
Jamie, I was wondering, I've heard before that some people say like an LLM in tax law is almost mandatory. Like so many people go back and get the LLM. Do you feel that way, or do you think that it's okay to just
mandatory? No, but I do think it's very, very helpful. Where I do think you'll see more people prizing the LLM in tax law is in the private sector, in big law firms especially. I was one of a very few people in the state government who had an LLM. Most of them did not. They, finished law school and went right into the Department of Revenue. They may have had that kind of accounting background that I did not. But I do think it's one of the few LLMs that has immediate practical application and immediate practical.
What are some of the courses that you can take while you're still in law school focused on tax?
So most law schools will have a federal tax 101. That's your basic income tax class. It's going to focus predominantly on corporate income. So I would suggest starting there. If you have access to an accounting class, like an accounting for lawyers, and you don't otherwise have an accounting background, that's another great class to start with. And obviously, if you think you're going to go into tax, take the tax classes that are available in your law school, and then go intern, because it's so important to get that practical kind of hands in the dirt experience of learning tax and seeing how it's applied. I'd say that it varies the degree to which a law school will have tax classes. Most of them don't have state and local tax specific classes. So I did my LLM at Georgetown. Georgetown is one of the few schools that has that state and local tax concentration. In fact, you can go and just do their state and local tax certificate program, which I found invaluable. NYU has one and BU has one. And those are the three kind of state tax specific programs that are top notch and extremely.
And it's very common, that people will do a JD degree at one law school and then do an LLM degree at a completely different law school. There are some combined JD LLM programs and some people do those, but it's also, they're two completely separate degrees. So it's not like you have to go to the same law school for both. So just wanted to clarify that.
No, and that's a good point, Angie. I think in the tax world, if you are going to go to one of those schools that has one of those LLM programs, you probably have access to more tax classes as part of your JD program, which may be able to give you the flexibility to specialize a little bit more through your LLM program than you otherwise would, but it's absolutely not at all necessary to go to the same law school and LLM program. So I know I see some questions in there. I'm going to stop. I could go on and on about tax law all day and my favorite kind of classes and cases that I'm working on because I'm just that big of a tax nerd. But I am going to stop and see if anybody has any questions.
While they're thinking of their questions, I just want to say, Jamie is the only person who's ever been able to make tax law interesting for me. If you are not following her on LinkedIn, you need to follow her because she posts some great content about tax. And, when I've been following all of these other attorneys in other practice areas, I've started learning so much about what they're passionate about. And it makes me think, oh, maybe that I would have been interested in some of these areas. But, when I was in law school, I took the federal tax class that we had and hated it and then just never decided to go into that area. But I think, now that I see how passionate practitioners are about their practice areas, really makes me interested to learn more about them. So, there's so many different areas of law that you traditionally just don't think about. Most people don't grow up wanting to be a probate lawyer, right?
Yeah.
But then if you meet a probate lawyer that's all about probate, then you're like, oh, maybe this would be for me. So
I say to my interns when they come work, when I was in Massachusetts and now if they come work with me in tax, I'm either going to convert you to a tax nerd for life and you're going to get the juice and run with it and love it, or you're just going to have a great time but realize tax is not for you. And that's okay too. I would love to turn you into a tax nerd because especially we're a room full of women here. I think especially we need more women in tax. It's still very much.
I'm totally a nerd already, so you'd only have to convert me on the tax part.
Yes, very true. Yep.
What's the range of entry-level pay for a tax attorney?
That's a really great question. It depends on the employer that you're looking at, quite frankly. I would say if you're looking to go into the public sector at a state government, at the federal government, the pay for tax lawyers is generally higher than for other areas of government practice. I remember starting at the Department of Revenue, and the starting salary, now this was more than 10 years ago, but the starting salary there was $55,000. And that was almost double, quite frankly, what the Attorney General's starting salary was going to be. So it really varies depending on the agency that you're looking at. I'd say, if you're looking at mid-sized law firm, if you're looking to go into one of the accounting firms in their controversy and appeal practice, you're looking somewhere in the like 65 to 75,000 range. Big law is its own world.
Big law is definitely its own world.
But that's, that's a real, it is its own world. But that's a great question. I wish I had been more aware of what realistic starting salaries could be for lawyers, not just practice area specific, but for lawyers generally when I started law school. Entry level. So some classes, I think I answered some of the classes about LLMs and underlying classes. Just to close up, Meg, your questions about like business organizations, kind of the corporate classes, those are going to also be very helpful because you'll see a lot of the tax implications, especially for businesses when you're talking about income taxes, other types of gross receipts taxes, et cetera. Are going to be dependent on the way the company is set up. So the legal structure, is it an LLC? It's going to have different tax implications. Is it an S corp? It's going to have other tax implications. So that is a very helpful class. I'm loving these questions that are coming through. These are great. Emily asks about the impact litigation in the tax area. With regards to civil rights or whether there's other kinds of impact litigation. So let me give you an example of a case that's brewing right now that I would say is going to be impact litigation, but is not per se civil rights. And it's the case between New Hampshire and Massachusetts that is awaiting a decision of whether the Supreme Court is going to take it. The underlying issue in that case is remote workers. So what does it mean for a remote worker to be based in New Hampshire or Massachusetts, or to be working in a state other than where their employer's office is? This is going to have a dramatic impact for businesses on where are they required to file their taxes, not just sales and use tax, but corporate income taxes. This is going to have a huge difference for HR questions. Are they going to be subject to different employer obligations? It's going to have an issue on paid leave programs. It's going to have an issue and an impact on whether employers will allow their employees to remain as remote workers. And I think we've all seen the operational impact that can be of telecommuting on mass scale. And mostly that it went fairly smoothly for a lot of people. But I think in the pre-pandemic days, a lot of businesses had a much tighter grip on where they allowed their employees to work. And I think the pandemic has forced them to question that. And certainly this case will kind of put the nail in the coffin as to whether or not businesses will open the doors to employees from around the country, no matter where they're based, or have the businesses, kind of go back to that question or that thought that they really need to have employees only in the location where they're. So that's what I would think of as kind of impact litigation. I don't know, Emily, if that gets to the heart of your question, but I think that another area where you see tax litigation really do having an impact is, like you highlight in some of those civil rights cases. So when I very badly joke that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's first case at the Supreme Court was a tax case, and my first case at the Supreme Court is a tax case. So clearly I am RBG. Not really, but close. But I'm wearing the detention bow today, so I have to throw that in there. But when you look at how the tax code applies differently to different people, whether it's gender issues because of Social Security or right to retirement pay, that was the RBG case at the Supreme Court, whether we're looking at rights to the marital deduction for same-sex couples, that was one of the underlying issues in, this is Honorable, the case from about 5 years ago. Those are questions that can be answered in the tax world, again, because of this very deeply ingrained policy nature of taxes and how a state would use a tax provision to incentivize or disincentivize a social issue. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah,
I can keep going on, but
what are some differences between working for a government versus working for a private firm? What are some differences that you've seen that you either liked or didn't like?
well, some of the differences in the public sector are some of the more obvious ones. The schedule is set. I worked my 7.5 hours every day, and I went home. At the time, I wasn't allowed to bring my work home with me. So, your routine and your schedule is a little bit more set. You are representing the state that is your client. And so, you don't have the business development skills because you're not required to develop them in the first place. But you also only have one client, and you know what that client's industry is, what that client's position is going to be, and you're defending the state. So you're in that kind of high ground position where the state is presumed correct. I completely did not expect, and I fundamentally underestimated, I should say, that when you're looking or working for a business that has a footprint or has business going on in multiple states across the United States, that the complexities of that multi-state compliance are not ones that you can necessarily boil down a question to, this is the Massachusetts way that we do things. And this is, you have to look at the business only through the Massachusetts lens. When I was in the public sector, that's all we did. We said, Massachusetts, Massachusetts, Massachusetts. We don't really care what is going on for that business in any other part of the country. And I really didn't understand that. Just to go back to this kind of Wayfair Amazon case, the states really represented it as a software is a panacea for everything. All you have to do is flip the switch and you can start collecting and compliance will be easy peasy. This is not going to be a problem. And that's really my response to that. I mean, I gave them that response, but I was still working there. But I think that they don't understand how big or small a company may be and be caught up in the new rules or the shifting landscape, and that depending on what the business's industry is, their ability to be nimble in adopting new changes could be significantly impacted. Those are things I fundamentally underestimated when I was in the public sector that I have a much greater appreciation for now, that I am representing businesses and going up against the states and or local government. I'd say that one last thing that I didn't really talk about is, when we talk about things, sure. When we talk about state taxes, I've spent a lot of my time on the call today talking about Massachusetts and Maine and Texas and all these states, but there's also a local component to taxes that we don't really see right away. Believe it or not, there's more than 11,000 tax jurisdictions in the United States. And there are some local jurisdictions that, they act almost like their little kingdom. And they could have policy positions or tax provisions that are completely different from the state, even though they're part of the same, Colorado is a great example. It's a Byzantine system at the best of days. And that in and of itself adds its own level of complexity.
So because of the complexities of multiple states and kind of the interactions between doing business in multiple states, do you only represent clients in certain states, or is it nationwide?
My practice is nationwide. Okay. So I do represent businesses. Again, that was the draw for me of this particular law firm. But I would say for a lot of law firms that have a state and local tax practice, they're regionalized. They may, if they're a small firm especially, they may only practice in their state and handle their state-specific matters. They might do a small region, so just New England or just, the kind of Gulf Coast states or just the Pacific Northwest, because keeping track of multi-state national is a lot to keep track of. And it makes it easier to do your job and become a known expert if you're only looking at just one state.
And they're always ever changing, right?
So they're always ever changing.
Keep up with all of them.
Thanks for a great LinkedIn presence, because I always have something to talk about, I guess you should say. Emily, another great question. So transmittable tax policies. So
are different subdivisions of tax treated as entirely separate, or?
Yeah. Subdivision. So Emily, do you mean the different tax types? And I would say that there are general concepts that are similar across the tax types. And do feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions. I'll check the chat. That's what I'm looking at over here when I look sideways. But feel free to unmute yourself and speak away. So I know, Emily, you had that question. I'll let you clarify, then I'll answer.
Yeah, so I was thinking, because I didn't study taxes in undergrad, so I'm just comparing it to what I know about law. So for example, in the First Amendment, there have been cases saying like, well, we are going to have parity between the speech clause and the petition clause because of their similarities. And so I'm thinking about the tax case you just mentioned, the New Hampshire case about remote work and between jurisdictions. And kind of already dealt with that, right? When Amazon or eBay and stuff were selling between states because of this new online platform, they had a sort of debate about whether the sales tax was going to be based on where the seller was or where the buyer was. So I'm wondering to what extent I can expect like tax acts in that sort of parity way that like the First Amendment does, for example, or whether that's something that is very much like a constitutional law issue and not so much spread across like other kinds of law.
That's a great question. I think you get to the answer in that the parity comes from the constitutional standards that apply to state and local tax. So where there is a standard or a decision from the Supreme Court on that, the Wayfair case was, what is nexus? Nexus meaning connection. Think of it like a Venn diagram that overlap. That is going to apply generally across more than one tax type and to more than one state. But you take that general principle and then you go look to the state-specific statute. And that's where the variety comes in. That's where the need to interpret a principle in light of context. I know we're talking about remote workers, but the thing that I love about controversy, it's like that backward looking kind of hindsight 2020 way of thinking about the law. And just imagine the audit cases and the appeals that are going to be working through 3 or 4 years ago, when we're talking about what happened during the pandemic. What was the context to a business during the pandemic, and why did that context make a difference? Because the business is Zoom, right? Or because the business is one that serves schools, and because schools were closed, their business foundered. So it's I think there are some concepts that carry over, but not as many as in other areas. Meg, so you raise a really interesting question that I think is a trend going right now, is this idea of what is the carryover between consumer protection or antitrust and tax. What we're seeing right now, I've talked a lot about the controversy side with state governments and auditing and appeals, but what we're starting to see a lot more is the private tax litigation. Oftentimes this is coming in the form of class actions, where a claim may be that a business collected tax it shouldn't have, or collected more tax than it should have. And often these are raising questions like consumer protection issues. I think that there were or I was following a set of consumer protection cases involving Amazon out in California, where they were looking at, I don't know if you guys were seeing this, but it was a hoverboard that blew up, was the underlying consumer protection case. And that one was looking at, well, is Amazon actually the seller in this case and the right party in the litigation, because Amazon was the marketplace and not a marketplace seller. And in that context, who is the seller? That will translate right over into the tax world, because that is going to be, who do you go after in an audit, or who do you go after in liability to say this is the business that should have collected the taxes because this is the business that was the seller. So if that answers your question, Meg, you're starting to see a lot more kind of intersection between tax and other areas. Data and privacy is a huge one right now, and that crossover between data privacy, data sale and consumption. I posted today on LinkedIn about digital ad taxes that are starting to rise, but the next level of that is coming out of Washington, and that's just a tax on the sale of data. Forget ads, but it's a tax on the data. And that is coming out of this idea with the data privacy world that businesses need to be able to quantify what they're selling, how much data they're selling. And now that they have that information, states are saying, well, if you can quantify it, we can tax it. Great. Anybody else have any questions?
What are some of the things that you like about working in a private firm?
Ooh, I love not being limited to one state anymore. I love that. I love that I can work remotely, because at least pre-pandemic, a lot of states, I mean, quite frankly, they didn't even have laptops for the employees. So I liked that flexibility. I like being able to work directly with the businesses now, and to be able to take things like their industry and their context and their product and their service, and then learn about them, and learn how to serve them. I really think of what I do as a service to my clients' businesses. I am taking one part of anxiety, if you will, off of their plates, so that way they can focus on running their business. And I love thinking about it in that service.
And what sizes of businesses do you generally work with? And are there specific industries that are most common, or
Yeah.
do you share everything?
I tend to work with retailers, so businesses that they're selling by catalog, which a lot of businesses still do, or e-commerce, or retail in general. They have a store and an online presence, or an app. There's an app for that. And digital services companies. So companies that are providing software as a service. Think of it, kind of all this online digital economy that we're living in now. Those are my clients. I do represent businesses of all sizes. So, these could be a startup that's just, trying to think proactively, what are the tax things that I need to be aware of coming down the pike? But it could be, a Fortune 50 company as well. Everybody.
And are most, I guess most of your matters handled hourly, or are they flat fee? How does that generally work?
We're still predominantly an hourly rate company. We do some work on flat fee scale, but when you talk about appeals and litigation, I think I have found it hard to translate, because we can't do contingency fee work at all. So I found that hard to translate what is the cost of litigation and boil that down to a flat fee in a way that makes everybody accepting.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think these are things that I didn't really understand when I was a law student, is like, how do lawyers actually make money? Where does the money come from? What are the structures of billing? I mean, you'll hear a lot in different practice areas. There's just different customs. If you're in personal injury, almost all personal injury cases are done, contingency. If you're in, intellectual property law, there's a trend that many of the prosecution type matters where you're helping people apply for trademarks or patents or copyrights are all flat fee, so that clients have predictability. But then there may be litigation matters or enforcement matters that are still handled on hourly fees. And I think that all of those things are changing a lot in many different practice areas. You know, firms are trying to meet the needs of their clients better, and they're trying to give them more predictability. They're trying to help create fee structures that make sense for their clients. And clients tend to like flat fees because it's predictable. They know, you know, if I'm going to file a trademark application, it's going to be $1,500 as opposed to, oh, I don't know, this one might be 800 and then this might be 3,000 and you know they don't like that. So,
yeah, you know, I think we're seeing that the side of the practice that is slightly more transactional, or the planning side, you know, for businesses that are now trying to grapple with what is their nexus footprint, where are they required to file, that translates a little bit easier to a type of package deal than if they're in an audit and having to appeal something. Because as much as we try to be efficient about how we work and serving our clients and cut things off early in the audit process, in some ways it depends on the auditor. Some auditors are great to work with and some of them are just really not. And that is going to make a huge difference in the cost to wrap that case up.
Totally.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Jamie? I know we're getting closer to the end here, but we've got about 8 minutes, so I'll go ahead and let you guys just ask away. Feel free to ask them in the chat box and we can get to them, or just jump on camera.
Yeah. Good for tax trivia. Chocolate is not a food subject to these grocery exemptions, much as I'm a chocoholic. So, you know, you want the logic, chocolate is from a fruit, it grows on a tree, therefore it should be a food, right? Or salad.
What's one of my food groups? Like, I think I consume enough of it that it's probably a food group.
I know. But, you know, it's little things. I think that I joke in some ways. I have celiac disease, so I can't have any gluten. And clearly someone who is writing some of these tax policies in states is not celiac, because they wrote in the definition of candy in most states. It's not candy if it has flour in it. It's okay, well, Kit Kat bars, Twix bars, licorice, Twizzlers, you know, those are clearly not candy, so I should get my tax deduction for those, and they should be treated as exempt.
Jamie, what's some advice that you have for law students or people that are thinking about going to law school? Any tips and tricks of the trade? Intern.
Even if your law school doesn't require an internship like Northeastern did, interning as you can is invaluable practical experience. I'd say don't get caught up in feeling the need to take a class in law school because it's going to be on the bar exam. Take the class that you want to take. But I would also strongly suggest that you take practical classes if you can. You can learn the theory and the substance of the law, you know, and in the tax world, it changes so rapidly that what you learn now in law school may or may not still be good law in 3 years. But learning the practical skills of, you know, how to draft a complaint, how to draft an answer, how to draft a contract, how to argue a case on appeal, those are going to be practical daily skills that are really, really important to get. And start talking.
If you're not sure what those are when you're in law school, because I wasn't quite sure, you know, there's these doctrinal classes and then there's practice-based classes. Like, you can just always talk to the professors who teach those classes and just find out like how much of this is going to be actual hands-on stuff. You know, I mean, some oral advocacy classes are a little bit more theory-based. Some oral advocacy classes, like, you're going to be up giving an oral presentation every single class. There are some, you know, advanced writing classes that are, you know, very heavy drafting. They'll have you actually drafting real contracts, drafting real applications. So you can always ask the professors for information on those classes to find out which ones are much more practice-based. And are there, if people are just, they want to become tax nerds too, are there specific organizations that you might recommend that they could join, that they could, you know, go to their events or even follow on LinkedIn or on any social media pages?
The American Bar Association has a really robust tax section, so I would start there as an organization. I'd also say, one, get on LinkedIn if you're not already. Get on LinkedIn. I think a lot of you are. Just start talking to the lawyers. So, you know, start with alumna from your school. Go to your alumni office and say, you know, I want to practice tax law. Do we have any alumna in that field? that practice in that area, because 9 times out of 10, you send them an email and say, can we do a 15-minute Zoom coffee? And they will say, absolutely, 100%, I'd love to talk to you. I know I would if and I do every time I get those calls. ABA tax section. There are a couple think tanks out there, depending on what your perspective is going to be. If you really want to go into public sector work, then the Multi-State Tax Commission is one place that you may want to look, and they do more think tank kind of policy. If you want to be private sector side and work for businesses and go into private law firms, then places like COST, the Council on State Taxation, is a way to start. But also a lot of state bar associations have tax sections, and that's a great way to start learning who is in the bar of that state. Get to know your colleagues, your peers, the people that you're going to be up against in the courtroom and doing business over.
Do you find that tax is a relatively small area in the grand scheme of things? I mean, I know IP is, but I have no idea whether tax is niche or broad.
Well, tax is so broad, just tax generally. State and local tax is very niche. We know everybody in the country that's practicing, at a national level, because there's very few of them. I'll be honest and say there's even fewer women. I am desperately hoping to change that. I believe strongly in women in tax being amazing. So come join me. It's a small practice area, and that's even more important. I think one practical piece of advice that I got from the law firm that I worked for before going to law school was always treat the people in your community well, particularly your legal support staff, but also opposing counsel and other peers, because you never ever know when you're going to need to call them. You never know what they're going and dealing with. You never know what's going to happen in a case. And so building that collegiality starts at the beginning. And the tax world is the state and local tax world is such a small world that everybody knows everybody. And you want to keep building those bridges as you can.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Jamie. I really, really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Thank you for all the students who attended, and I hope to see you guys again next week on all of our Zoom meetups. So please feel free to reach out to me or Jamie if you have follow-up questions. After today, we dropped our LinkedIn links in the chat box, so feel free to connect with us, and have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye-bye.